Hello, and welcome to my YouTube channel. This is Brenton Lengel of Insurrection with Brenton Lengel, formerly carried on the Starcom radio network and now carried on YouTube because I decided to break down and come off the radio and start doing stuff on the regular internet. And I am joined here with Dave Pepose, creator of Spencer and Locke.
Hi.
Dave, do you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. Yeah, I'm David Pepose. I wrote.
I called you Pepose.
It's fine. It's an occupational hazard. When you've lived with this name as long as I have, you've heard every possible pronunciation, all sorts of different letters thrown in for extra spice. But yeah, I'm the writer of Spencer and Locke, Go Into the Chapel, the upcoming Grand Theft Astro, and my newest book. We just unveiled it on Kickstarter this week, The OZ. Which is like what if the Hurt Locker and Mad Max took place in the Wizard of Oz. So I'm very excited. We've been working on this book for a very long time, about 3 years now, almost to the date. And yeah, I'm so excited to finally get to talk about it. And I'm even more excited with seeing how people have responded to this series so far.
Yeah, well, dude, I'm stoked. Like, your Kickstarter was amazing. Like, I mean, it took off really fast, and things have been going really well for a lot of creators on Kickstarter, but I think you blew all of us out of the water.
Nobody was more surprised than me. I talked with a number of people who have had success on Kickstarter as a platform. White Ash's Charlie Stickney, The Jump's Ryland Grant, Pat Shand of Destiny New York fame, Russell Nahelty with his laundry list of Kickstarter projects, including Ichabod Jones and Cthulhu's Hard to Spell. And it's funny because some of the people, and actually I should say there's a whole other brain trust of Los Angeles-based creators who have all had success on Kickstarter. And so they've been press ganging me for the better part of a year saying you should do a Kickstarter. And some of them were saying kind of aim low, like you should probably, I think you'll make $5,000.
I heard that same thing.
Russell Nahelty, in particular, I love him. He was like, listen, you don't have any data yet, so just go real conservative. And Clay Adams was another person who was such a help. Where he was like, listen, sometimes it's really fun to watch it snowball. So like if you go low. Charlie was the one who was like, you should go a little higher. And Ryland, I got to give him credit. He was the one who was like, you're like half of where you should be. And I was like, no, man, I don't think so. It's going to be 30 days. It's going to take this long to make $6,000. And so you have backup plans and you have backups to the backups and you have backups to the backups, but nobody ever tells you what happens when you fund in 2 hours.
Yeah.
It's like going down the street to pick up a sandwich and you end up on the moon. Like there's no preparing for that level of overshoot. And it's been just overwhelming in the best possible ways. I couldn't be more grateful. I feel like we had just a real convergence of a lot of things really help us out. We had, my readership from Spencer and Locke and Going to the Chapel. They showed up in a big way. My friends and family showed up in a big way. Comics journalists showed up in a big way. I just wrapped up my 12-year tenure at Newsarama the week before. I think people felt a little wistful maybe. And comics creators, that really meant a lot to me. The fact that we were able to have a lot of creators rally around us. And some of these were people whose work I covered, sometimes critically, and they still were really, Scott Snyder, Gail Simone, Mark Russell, they all really kind of came together and lifted us up. And it meant the world. And what's been so great and so interesting for me is I knew doing Kickstarter was going to be a whole other ball game. But then when we blew past the goal the way we did, we're at 400% and climbing now in 4 days. It's suddenly.
And how many? Last I saw, you had 666 supporters. What are you at right now?
Now we're at 669. Nice. It's not just a new ball game. You're learning a brand new sport on the fly. I've said Kickstarter is like a different planet than the direct market with its own laws of physics. And so what's been really interesting and fun for me is figuring out, okay, what can we do to continue to bring in new readership? Because look, I'm not doing this for the money. I'm doing this. I did this to get a wider demographic, to do outreach to a customer base and a reader base that I hadn't done any outreach to before. So I want more people. I want the big consensus. I want to invite more people to the table.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, of course, you don't want it to even have the appearance of it being a money grab. And so you're thinking of ways, how do we enhance the book? So for example, we're adding in new pinups to the book. We're talking with our printer now about enhanced cover options. But it's also figuring out, okay, what are extras that we can add for stretch goals? Things that we can add in our existing shipping that doesn't blow up the shipping for everybody else. But also, so it's a combination of enhancing the book, extra things that we can fit into our existing packaging, and then things that we can distribute digitally. And that's been a really cool way to sort of figure things out. I'm pretty sure we're going to hit our stretch goal probably by sometime tomorrow. And I've got another stretch goal behind that. We're going to be unveiling 2 stretch goals probably tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And on top of that, we've got, a digital creator extravaganza. We've got about a dozen amazing indie creators, and we've had so many more reach out to us to the point where we're going to probably start staggering, figuring out, okay, this is going to be in the first Kickstarter digital comics extravaganza. And then we're going to add more to the next one. And then we're going to add even more to the next one. It just to keep building and keep adding value.
I think, and keep bringing in people that are interested in these other comics, but also be interested in your work.
Exactly. So much of it, you hear the word crowdfunding, and I think that the crowd element, you don't realize that even as a creator, it's sort of this idea that a rising tide floats all boats. Mm-hmm. One of the sort of lightning in a bottle moments that I couldn't recapture if you asked me to is that we launched on the same day as Scott Snyder, the writer of Batman. Mm-hmm. And I've known Scott for a long time, and we had actually been talking the previous night, and he was like, "Oh, sorry, I've been so busy." We were talking about the OZ, and he was like, "I've just been slammed because I'm launching this Kickstarter tomorrow." I was like, "Oh, we're going to be Kickstarter twins." And in the direct market, that would be like a kill shot. Like if Scott Snyder pulled a Beyonce and dropped a brand new 72-page image book in a comic shop, the comic shop, that would be less shelf space for us, less less attention from the shop owners. And I get it, like they've got bills to pay. So if they have to choose between selling a book that the Batman writer wrote and the guy that Spencer and Locke writer wrote, yes, I would say you have to have your head examined if you went for me. And so, but that's not the case on Kickstarter. Kickstarter, it makes perfect sense. That's their business model, is that you buy one thing on Kickstarter, they want to recommend a bunch of other things, and they want to keep you in that ecosystem. That's how they make money. And so it incentivizes Kickstarter to say, hey, okay, like let's keep, let's keep advertising this. So Scott
absolutely, Snyder, and you own it a little bit more when you give to a Kickstarter. It's more than just picking up the book in the shop. You helped that book come about, and your money's going directly to the creator.
Absolutely. It's very interactive, and being able to talk directly with our readership. It's something unlike anything I've done, even on Twitter with direct market books. But
I was amazed at it because for years before I transitioned into full-time writing, I did I did fundraising, nonprofit arts fundraising for a living. I taught people how to ask, how to, I funded the freaking ballet at some of the highest levels and stuff. Mm-hmm. And I remember just having my people, be on the phone with somebody and just trying to just get $100 out of them for this major arts project. Right. And then you drop something online at Kickstarter and there's $6,000 in 2 hours.
Yeah. It's just, I was not prepared for the speed of it all. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's just, it's a rising tide floats all boats. If Scott Snyder is cracking six figures, he's past $100,000 now. For me, that's like $100,000 commercial. It's suddenly his 1,000+ people, they're all learning about us. And so, yeah, it was it's been a wonderful experience. I think it's been one of the most encouraging days I've had as a creator in the industry. It's certainly it's if it's not the most, it's one of like the top two. I mean, it's really just incredible. And yeah, and the fact that we've got 26 days left, like that's the thing that's the thing that really bakes my noodle, is just like, where's this gonna go? Like, there's so many twists and turns over the next 4 weeks that I don't know.
We'll see what happens.
It's exciting.
Yeah, my advice, and by the way, if you are interested, you can very much include Swaza and 1 and 2 and any additionals if you want to use it at any point.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. Again, floats all boats. And I feel like one of the ways I first became aware of you, like I was first aware of you because I'm a huge Calvin and Hobbes fan, and I heard about Spencer and Locke. Yeah. And I read, you sent me the issue, the first issue, by the way, and I read it. And on that first page, I'm just like, oh, my childhood.
Yep, right in the childhood.
It was really good, like, and I loved how you switched back and forth between like the Watterson style and like the sort of Frank Miller inspired like hard-boiled detective.
Jorge Santiago Jr., he's the real deal. He's the full package. I knew I wanted to do those Watterson style flashbacks in the book, and when I first got Jorge on board, I said, hey bud, like, do you want me to find another artist to do the flashbacks? He's, nah, I got it. And I was like, nah, you got it? And he's like, yeah, I got it. And yeah, as you can tell, he just knocked it clean out of the park.
Right out of the park. And it was great. You wound up, so like, in a lot of ways, you're doing something similar with the OZ, and it is kind of similar to because the way I first, like, you personally first came into my orbit was on Wayne's Comics podcast when I was promoting the first Snow White Zombie. Yeah, they're like, "Oh, you gotta talk to Dave." From Spencer and Locke, and I'm like, oh, okay. And then like I've kind of internalized that, and I'm like, well, maybe I'll run into him at a convention or something. Not realizing COVID was right around the corner. Right. I should be at Dragon Con in just a week or two, and it's killing me.
I get it. I had 16 shows on the agenda this year, and I only got to go to 2 of them.
Oh, jeez.
So I feel you. It's
but on the plus side, you've been very productive. You got like a bunch of books done. And
I've written. I think I have finished 4 books this year, and I'm actually, as soon as this Kickstarter wraps, I'm back to work on Spencer and Locke 3. And actually, I just got I just got an email this morning asking me to develop a horror pitch. So I'm very excited about that. That has been something that has been simmering for a long time. I've been really excited about this concept. So the fact that somebody's interested in it, potentially even, I'm very excited. It's very cool. Yes, I've said I miss cons. I miss talking with readers, and I miss doing that outreach. But I do like the focus it's given me, and it's given me that additional bandwidth to really hunker down and build up that war chest of material that I want to have out in 2021 and beyond.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, that's really exciting, and I love that you're working on horror. Horror, because I noticed that Spencer and Locke, you do something. There's 2 things that go into like what I do with Snow White Zombie Apocalypse, and that's that you alternate between. And I saw this in Spencer and Locke, alternating between humor and horror.
Sure.
And this actually, like, the way I was taught to do this, because I started as a playwright, and my training's in the theater, and the French grand guignol style of theater would do a thing where it would be a night of short plays, and they would alternate between a comedic play and a horror play.
Interesting.
And comedic and horror. And what they found was if they did it right, and if they managed it just right, the comedy makes the horror more horrifying, and the horror builds the tension for the release of the comedy, making the comedy funnier.
Interesting.
And I feel like you tricked into that when you were doing Spencer and Locke, definitely. And I also saw a bit of it in the OZ.
Sure, absolutely. I think, I mean, it's funny. I didn't know the historical context of that, but absolutely. I mean, it's one of those things. I always I see it as walking a tightrope, and especially for that's the reason I like to do mashups. And all of my work to this point has been a mashup of some kind. Usually, it's either properties that I've enjoyed or genres that I like, but it gives me wiggle room as a creator. Because if for example, for the OZ, what if Mad Max and the Hurt Locker took place in the Wizard of Oz? If I'm digging into the sort of military element and I'm not getting any traction, maybe I try the fantasy element. And if that's not working, I can dig into Dorothy's head as a disillusioned Iraq war veteran. And if that doesn't work, I can look into the history of Oz. And so that always gave me maneuvering room. And maybe that's just me being lazy as a writer or not wanting to commit to any one thing rather than committing to two. But it really, that seems to be my process anyway, is that rather than getting stuck and having no traction, I switch gears and I go off road it a little bit.
No. I totally get that. And yeah, I did something similar. Last night I was writing the first 3 pages of Snow White Zombie number 5. And I was like, I had to go completely off script because I was introducing a new character and kind of adding an interstitial sequence that hadn't been in the original play.
Yeah.
Because the first 2 trades of Snow White Zombie are going to follow the events of the play.
Sure.
So while I was doing this, I was like, oh my God, how am I going to do this? What am I, because there's that fear as a writer. Every time you try to do something new, you're like, oh God, what if I forgot how to do it?
Right.
And I, what I wound up doing was I pulled from, because normally when I don't know what I'm going to do, I'll grab like a fairy tale or a series of fairy tale characters and just smash them together with my own sensibilities. This time I pulled from the actual Norse sagas. And we have a Draugr based upon the Witch Queen Skuld, who is a semi-historical figure. She's like a half elf, and I have her brutally murdering the giant from like Jack the Giant Killer as he goes charging into her like graveyard.
Right.
And just like taking all of those stories and knitting them together, because especially when they don't fully fit, it's something that a writer, especially someone like yourself, who really likes to do genre mashups, can really sink your teeth into, because you get a little bit of structure, and then you push in and you add your voice to it and tie it together. It's like almost like collage.
Yeah, that's a great way to phrase it. I think some of it's also, it's like I got my start as a newspaper reporter.
That's so cool.
I worked. That was part of how that got started. Was I didn't know what I thought I wanted to be a lawyer when I was in college, and one internship and one philosophy of law class later, I realized that was not for me. And my aunt was a copy editor at the Washington Post, and I at the time I was dating a girl who her family had just moved to outside of Boston, so she was going to be staying there instead of our hometown where we met. And so I was like, I need to stay nearby. So I was like, well, I can write. I know I can write. So maybe I'll try being a reporter. And my first internship was just such a wonderful experience that it was the first of a 15-year career doing journalism in some capacity. And my first job out of college, I was a newspaper reporter. I covered crime and state politics.
I'm already seeing the genesis of Spencer and Locke.
Yeah, and I think that when you're writing an article, you're doing interviews and you're doing that research to put all the pieces together, and then you fit it in kind of modularly, because you need to know how to be able to write for a certain word count or a certain inch space, but sometimes that's what the print version looks like, and then the online version you're adding more stuff to it. So what's the stuff you have to tell? And then what's the stuff that if you got a chance to circle it back, what would you add? That's kind of how I approach the way I structure my work. Sometimes I have sequences that I'm like, oh, this is too early. I guess I'm going to lop off the beginning and lop off the end. I'm going to put it earlier and just work on the transitions. It helps me when I write out of order. I do that a lot. If there's a sequence that is not working for me, I jump ahead. I'm a big dessert first kind of guy. Because that way, if I've written all of my dessert and I haven't gotten much place, I haven't gotten anywhere, then I'm kind of like, oh, okay, well, that wasn't really a story then. That, I'm glad I got that out of the way. But usually it gives me enough momentum that I'm like, okay, I've written all this stuff. I just need to do some connective tissue, or I just need to eat my vegetables now. But I've written 80% of the story. So like, I guess that's what I got to do.
That's almost better than, because what I do sometimes is I just half-ass the connective tissue and then jump to the dessert. And then I find that there's been times I've been forced, usually by my writing partner, to go back and rewrite the stuff that I half-assed. And we discover really, really important stuff in the connective tissue. And suddenly it will become some of the most important chapters or sequences that otherwise I wouldn't have known that I could do that with that connective tissue if I hadn't written the dessert first.
Right.
Yeah, right. But it seems like you don't even waste your time with the bullshit writing.
No, that's sort of my thing, is I just try to kind of push forward as best as I can, because momentum is sort of my secret weapon. If I've written, usually if the OZ I had written originally is 6 issues, standard sized issues, and thankfully it broke really nicely across the 3-act structure, and I realized, I could pair these together and make them 44 pages. But it was one of those things, it's like, you write the first issue and you're really excited just because you're like, let's see if this crazy thing works. And then the second and third issues, it's kind of like, oh boy, I'm going uphill. I hope I'm okay. And by the 4th issue, you're like, I am exhausted. But then issues 5, you're kind of like, all right, I see the end in sight. And then issue 6, you just blast it out because you're just like, oh my God, I'm so happy with how the story turned out, but I'm also so excited to be done. And so
because you've been living with it for a while, you've been hanging out with those people for so long, like the ones in your story. Now, and you mentioned 3-act structure. Are you trained as a screenwriter?
I mean, I studied creative writing in college. I did. I was one class away from majoring in creative writing. I did American Studies, theater, and creative writing, and of course, I did.
Theater, notable useless style of classes and major.
And so I took a lot of classes in screenwriting, and I took some writing and dramatic structure, and it's one of those things. It's weird. I've had to teach myself a lot about stuff. My screenwriting professor's voice is still in my head. He Mark Weinberg, lovely guy, but he did not treat us with kid gloves whatsoever. And that's fine. I'm not worried about that. And so he's anytime I'm like, oh, this doesn't feel right. It's usually I can hear his voice in the back of my head being like, you took a shortcut, or this doesn't make sense. What's your refrigerator moment, as he used to call it? He said, you get one moment in your story where somebody reads it and they go, they watch the movie, they go home, and then they open up the refrigerator and are like, wait a minute.
That doesn't make sense. Yeah.
You get one of those. And so, I mean, I think having self-taught a lot of my writing, and I really, a lot of that self-teaching came from my work at Newsarama. I moonlit there for 12 years. I just wrapped up the week before my Kickstarter started. I had more books in the pipeline from bigger publishers, and I realized that I could not wear both hats comfortably for much longer. And the way that it shook out was there was an opportunity to bring more resources to the review team, and being able to put the money that I was getting in that pot. I was just like, oh, this is the perfect chance. I get to leave the team better than I found it. Because when I started, nobody was getting paid. There were no review copies. It was buy your own copies of the book to write your own reviews. Comixology wasn't a thing. And there was only one column a week when I first was recruited, and it wound up branching into almost every single day. So that said, Newsarama was the perfect grad school to learn this stuff. I reviewed books all the time. It forced me to analyze and break down what I liked and what I didn't. It also it made me articulate all this stuff. I had to defend my work. And so I felt like I was learning people's tricks. I was learning from people's mistakes. It certainly taught me not to be afraid of a deadline. And
you also consumed a lot of comics, more than you probably otherwise would, and a lot of different comics.
And I had an opportunity when I first started, and I was in rural Massachusetts pretty much from the moment I started. And then when I moved to New York, back to New York, I wasn't able to keep this up, but I had an interview series where I interviewed creators about their artistic process. And so I interviewed people like Scott Snyder, Nick Spencer, Rick Remender, Greg Pak, Marjorie Liu, tons of other people to boot.
New York is great for that.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is even are like people like Kieran Gillen and Fred Van Lente, just people who are really generous with their time over email, and interviewing them about how their process worked. It really there was a lot of light bulbs going off. Greg Pak, distinctly, I remember him saying, he gave himself permission to suck at writing when he first started.
Oh, that's so important.
And I didn't know that. I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in Missouri, and there, I didn't know any artsy people. I didn't know, how publishing worked. I didn't know how agents worked. I didn't know, and I certainly just thought you either had it or you didn't. And I'm living proof that that's not true. Is that I read a book that really kind of changed everything for me, called The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield.
I've heard really good things about that.
And it's not a book that teaches you how to write. It's a book that teaches you to get into the mindset of being a professional creator. And one of the things that Pressfield talks about is how do you demystify the process. And so I stopped looking at writing as magic, and I started looking at it as how do you build a chair. Everybody knows what a chair looks like. But there's a lot of different variations to a chair. You have some with three-legged stools, some that are four-legged, some that's just got the singular base. Do you have a back on it? Do you not have a back on it? Is that back a solid piece, or is it kind of a cutout? Is it made out of wood? Is it made out of plastic? Is there fabric on it? Is it a couch?
Did you accidentally build a couch?
Did you build a couch? And the more practice that you make on making these couches or making these chairs, the better you get at it. I mean, I had a process when I was in rural Massachusetts and I was feeling particularly restless. I wrote a short comic script every day for 90 days. A lot of them were terrible. None of them will see the light of day. Some of them I strip mined for parts later. But
which is why never get rid of your old bad work.
Yeah,
You'll find something to use it for.
You'll find something you might like later. But it taught me it really reinforced the structure for me. And it sort of encouraged me to be prolific with my concepts and not be so precious about it. And that's something I've carried with me ever since. My friends, who I still am friends with a lot of people on that review team. Some of my best friends are at Newsarama, and all the time I'm pestering them with like, "Hey, I got this idea," and half the time they're like, "You just invented Armageddon, or you just or you just invented the Matrix." But every so often, they will come, they'll say, "Oh, that's a really cool idea." Sometimes though, they make me defend my work and I have to recalibrate. And sometimes that's, "Oh yeah, okay, that was a sucky idea," or, "Oh, I didn't see it that way. That's probably a bad idea." But sometimes I'll never let them live it down. But my buddy Pierce Lydon, I distinctly recall them saying, they were telling me, they're like, "So you have two pitches. One of them is really good and sellable, and the other one's Spencer and Locke." And I just laugh because that other pitch is like in like redevelopment hell for me. And Spencer and Locke, I'm working on the third volume now. And so, but it's just one of those things that like, sometimes you got to trust your gut. But having people that you trust, that you can use as a sounding board, and whose values you trust, that you think, okay, we're at least in the same area, we're a little simpatico creatively, but that you trust that they're going to make it about the work and not about savaging you as a person. I think that's really important. That's certainly, I wouldn't be where I am without my brain trust.
Absolutely, especially once you start to attain any level of fame, because you really see that what happens with creators when nobody says no to them, and you get. I'll think of something stupid to mention that's huge, and people will get mad at me for saying it. But like, so one of the things that I noticed with your scripts, and thank you, by the way, for letting me read the scripts, the first two ones. We're not going to spoil anything, so don't worry about that. But they read really well. They were really concise. And one of the things I love about comic scripts is I was trained as a playwright.
Right.
No, first I was trained as an actor. Then I was trained as a playwright.
Right.
Then I was trained as a screenwriter in New York with this place, Jacob Kruger Studios. And
Okay.
he's an Emmy Award winning screenwriter. I'm actually starting another class with them under Ron Mars, a comic writing class with him.
Oh, I love Ron.
Yeah, he's great. I'm really looking forward to working with him just to get a more formal education in the field. I'm already creating comics, but might as well learn from an old pro, see what I can pick up.
Absolutely.
But yeah, when I was Jacob Kruger Studio, by the way, writeyourscreenplay.com, very legit. Definitely check them out to anybody who's listening. So anyway, one of the things I learned with a guy named George Straighton, and he helped me adapt the Snow White Zombie play into the 1 hour Snow White Zombie TV pilot, which I have, if anyone from Netflix is listening. And he worked for Xena and Hercules. He was the one who introduced the Norse gods to the Xena universe.
Sure.
So we were talking about structure, and he had this point where he was like, look, you don't want to sit down and go, this is the structure, I'm going to follow it.
Sure.
Instead, what you want to do is you're writing your story and you hit a point and you're like, there's something wrong and I don't know what, and I don't know how to fix it. And that's when you go back to the structure.
Sure.
And you'll find something that you missed by looking at one of the many different story structures. Yeah. So, but what I wanted to say, because one of the things that I love about comic writing is the structure is so free compared to screenplay where everything's buttoned down.
Sure.
Is that, but also because it's also very technical. It's a script. Yeah. You still managed to get a tear out of me.
Thank you.
In the second issue, I'm not going to mention what it was. I'll tell you after the thing.
I'm pretty sure I know exactly which moment you're talking about because it makes me choke up too.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
good.
I mean, for me, that's always been that's how I navigate my scripts. Is sort of what are the moments. First, I always say, what's going to make you cry. Yeah. And then I think what's going to make you laugh or what's going to make you like pump your fist. I got no shame. Like I love the show This Is Us. I love it. It's pure. It's total manipulation. But like I feel for these sad triplets all the time. And Sterling K. Brown, like, yeah, man, I'd step into traffic for that man. And I think that's kind of what we do as storytellers if we want to be effective about it. I said in an interview that my favorite comics are the intersection between high concept and emotional investment. That's what I always try to do. I always say that I'm the guy who comes up with like insane trash concepts and then them. That's like my directive is that I like there's literally been nothing I've ever pitched that people have not looked at with complete skepticism and then read it and been like, wow, I did not expect to like that. Which I that's going to be written on my tombstone.
I did not expect to like that.
I did not expect to like that.
It's a good tombstone, honestly, particularly completely out of context.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I'll take my compliments backhanded, and yeah, I think having those moments that's what makes you care. Am I allowed to swear on this?
Oh yes, you're definitely allowed. I'm an anarchist, dude.
I've said that my philosophy as a storyteller is it's the art of making strangers give a shit. And that's the thing. Like, as creators, you love your book because like that's your baby. You carried it and you birthed it, and it was painful and it was a lot of hard work. And anybody who says that like, oh man, I love the act of writing and it's so easy, like screw you. That's not how I work. I like having written, but the process of writing is usually alternating between pure anxiety and like, hey, this was a fun moment. Glad I got that out. So the thing is strangers, there's a lot of things competing for their time. And I like even, the way we interact and consume entertainment, it's a little disposable, I mean, even you and I who spend a lot of time working on our craft and we know how hard it is to make something. I'm sure that you would watch something on TV and like be like, well, this sucks, and just turn it off.
I did that recently with Cursed, actually.
Yeah, and like so it's one of those things that like we, it can be hard to have empathy for the amount of man hours and the dreams crushed that it takes to make a piece of entertainment. So that's why I'm kind of like, all right, like, how do I make somebody care about this? And I have something. I'm very fortunate that that my partner, she is not a comics fan, but she is a voracious reader. She reads a lot of fiction, and she's a magazine editor, and so she really keeps me tethered and grounded, I think, to something more human and accessible. Because the thing about comics, and I love comics, don't get me wrong, I'm a third generation comics fan. I love my Marvel, I love my DC. That's where I got my start. But it can be very the snake eating its own tail kind of stuff. It's
very
it's
self-referential.
Yeah. And, for me, I always try to work with stuff that's a little more universal. I mean, granted, of course, there's a certain generation that doesn't know what Calvin and Hobbes is because they're too young for it. But there's like
they will learn.
Yeah, anybody who was like cognizant over those 10 years that Watterson was doing that strip, they're like, oh, I get exactly what this is. Everybody knows what The Wizard of Oz is. For the case of Going to the Chapel, which was Die Hard meets Wedding Crashers, everybody's been to a wedding, and if you're one of the few people who hasn't, everybody's been in love. And so, those are sort of universal core struggles and concepts. And that's the stuff that I try to then make, like, hit you where you're home.
It also feels like with Going to the Chapel, there was an element of Kill Bill.
Yeah.
Like the Kill Bill was based on the story of the bride, and it feels like you went down that Kill Bill thing and expanded on that thing that was just like a little footnote for Tarantino.
Yeah, a little bit. I always saw, like, sure, there's definitely, I always say that I there are certain things with Tarantino that I've internalized, but like not the foot fetishes.
Yeah.
Or the use of the N-word. But I feel like
definitely not the racism and not those specific fetishes in my case. I have other fetishes that I will not tell you about.
Yeah.
But they're really weird. Okay.
His use of structure and his use of like kind of irreverent humor in his action, it's a little Shane Blacky as well. But for me, I really saw a lot of like Ocean's 11, like that kind of swagger.
Oh yeah.
Sort of just having a good time. I wanted to write a book, especially after Spencer and Locke, which like is outside of horror going to be the bleakest series I ever write. I wanted something that was light on its feet, and
Spencer and Locke is pretty. It's pretty dark.
Yeah, it gets dark. Like that one, we're threading the needle between like darkness and light, and trying to have like real heavy conversations about mental illness and childhood trauma, but also having like buddy cop humor in the mix.
Because what you're doing is inherently ridiculous, no matter how serious you make it.
Exactly. There's always that absurdity to the core concept. Whereas like Chapel, like I've said, it's Die Hard meets Arrested Development at a wedding. Like if you imagine the Bluth family in a hostage situation,
oh god,
like they're ridiculous.
It would have been a very good season of Arrested Development now that I think of it.
So OZ goes back to my roots a little bit more. I mean, it's not as dark as Spencer and Locke. I say tonally it's somewhere between Mad Max Fury Road and like maybe Star Wars or Star Wars Rogue One. It is kind of this larger than life action fantasy, but it's told from the perspective of this disillusioned soldier and sort of her military training and her soldier's eye. It looks at Oz in a different way. The land of Oz, in this story has teeth, and she sees this magical battlefield. She sees weapons to defend herself and those around her. And those were the kind of moments that were really fun for me in the book. You look at the Wizard of Oz's balloon and you don't see a platform for a halo drop, but Dorothy does. And so, I guess to go back a little, because, I've given the high concept of the OZ, but I probably should give a little bit of context to it, which is the OZ, it kind of reframes Dorothy Gale killing the Wicked Witch as like a botched regime change. And so,
Oh, gee, I wonder where you got that idea.
yeah,
But yeah.
it sort of, she kills the Wicked Witch, she clicks her heels
Mhm.
3 times, and she goes back to Kansas. And if you've read the Baum novels, or if you've watched the Judy Garland film, they try to wrap it up with a neat little bow. And anybody who's grown up during the invasion of Iraq knows that is not how that turns out. And so our story picks up a generation later, and Dorothy's granddaughter and namesake is a disillusioned Iraq war vet, and she's come home with some real trauma and some guilt and scars, and she's trying to put her life back together in Kansas. And then a tornado hits, and she's dropped into the war-torn land of Oz. So she's going to have to navigate both her past and her grandmother's legacy, and navigate her grandmother's former friends if she wants to survive the occupied zone, or as the locals call it, the OZ.
The O's. I love that title. Yeah, and so I also love that you have so as to not give away anything, I love that you have an enemy type that is a logical fallacy. I thought that was terrific.
Yeah.
Now this is actually, it's weird because I've been in the Iraq headspace lately, both because one of the guys who comes on my podcast, his name is Bobby of the 5x5 podcast.
Okay.
And he's a Afghan war vet, and he did like 2 tours and stuff. I'd be very interested to see how he reacts to your book. So, but like the other reason why is I'm listening to Flogging Molly again. And if you remember that album Float, it was like all about Iraq.
Yeah.
And so I was listening to that last night while I was writing, and it was putting me back to that place. And I think what you touched on in this is something that I've seen. Everybody loves these sort of darker and edgier reimaginings of childhood properties. And I have a little bit of a theory that as to why this may be going on. And I think it's I think it's a universal thing, but I think it's in particular a millennial thing, because you and I were both millennials as far as I can tell. I was hiking the Appalachian Trail when the crash of 2008 happened. I'd come out of the woods and I'd be like, "What? Okay, I'm going back in the woods. You guys deal with this."
Sure.
And then I moved to New York and was like kind of on the ground for Occupy Wall Street. And like, it's this sort of, and I grew up pretty decently middle class. My dad's a doctor,
Sure.
And so like you have the booming economy of the 90s and sort of the more insular life that a child lives. And then you are confronted with like the harsh reality, and there is a shock in that. And that transition, I feel, in a lot of ways plays out. And you did it with Spencer and Locke, and you're also doing it in a really interesting other way, because you're tying it directly into kind of our nation's most recent, like, kind of coming of age shock. I mean, like, there was obviously 9/11, but then Iraq and the fallout of Iraq, I feel like, has almost shaped the country more than 9/11 did. And so to relitigate that, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I find your perspective particularly interesting, because you've tread similar ground. For me, the way that I always envisioned it was, nostalgia, and you touched upon this a little bit. Nostalgia, it's a shared memory. It's a common image that we all share of when the world was a less complicated place, when it was safer. And especially these universal things like Calvin and Hobbes or The Wizard of Oz, they're populated by these archetypes that are very durable. They've clearly lasted the test of time. And I think by using these archetypes and using these universal images, we're able to navigate darker subject matter than we would without that, with a character that's been created whole cloth. And I think readers are more willing to follow you. They're able to sort of take that, they're able to push past that initial hesitation to see what happens. So you're able to take a deeper dive, because readers know instinctively that these icons won't break. No matter what I do in the OZ, it's not going to erase the Judy Garland film. Unless I have a time machine, it's not happening. And I think that means that they're a little bit more willing to give it a shot. And that means that they're able to follow us through these darker subject matter so they can get to that redemptive arc. They know that if these characters don't break, then maybe we as readers won't either. And I think that's something that once you get over that initial trepidation, I think that's a common thread to my work is that it's always darkest before the dawn, but when that dawn comes, it's particularly heroic and inspiring.
That's awesome. Thinking about it, it almost shows like the failures of the final season of Game of Thrones, because in a way,
Sure.
George R.R. Martin was kind of doing that. But what D&D did at the end was they had the characters break, and everybody was pissed off. And I mean, they made a number of other mistakes. But I think breaking the characters like that is just. I feel like that's something that you can't do and still tell a satisfying story necessarily.
Sure.
And again, I will. Sorry.
No, I think you're right. I mean, it's one of those things, like as a storyteller, you sort of have a contract with your readers a little bit. If you're setting it up as a tragedy, I mean, like look at a show like Succession, for example. Like nothing good is going to happen to these people. Like it's going to end badly. You kind of know from the jump that these are all shitty people, that like that is going to be a bloodbath by the time that's over. If any of those characters are like alive and not in prison, like maybe there's going to be one of them, you know? But yeah, I think Game of Thrones, it was sort of like, I'm not sure it was properly established. And the thing is, I don't think you necessarily need to have established it from the first season, but like, because that last season was so truncated that like it felt very out of left field. I mean, you know, I get the sense watching a show like Breaking Bad, for example, which I really enjoyed that show, although it's a show that it's such an investment, I'm not sure I'd be able to watch it again. But I sensed watching that show that the evolution of it shifted quite a bit. That they, you know, you could tell they put in their A game, their best effort for that pilot, hoping it would catch on. And, you know, I remember reading that it took them a while to get that. Like it wound up on AMC for a reason.
Oh yeah.
And
well,
you know,
interesting thing about Breaking Bad, by the way,
yeah.
The pilot is a serious adaptation of a comedy script. It was supposed to be a screwball comedy.
Interesting.
And that's why he's like in his underwear at the beginning, and
that's,
like,
you know, that makes perfect sense. And you know, yet you can see by like the end of the first season they've got bigger ambitions, and then by the time that, you know, Walter has his big head-to-head with Gus Fring, you're like, okay, they're clearly shifting towards another, the goalposts have moved. And you can do that, but you got to really set it up like at least within the context of your season, of your final story. I'm not sure Game of Thrones did. And you know, I think that's when it starts violating the contract that your readers that you've established with your readers. I remember reading something in, I think it was a screenwriting book, maybe it was Sid Field's screenplay, where they were talking about some sort of film. It was like an older film. It's like a World War II thing. These guys are in a plane and it gets shot and they're about to crash. And then suddenly the plane like sprouts cartoon wheels and just like makes it safely on the ground. And you're just kind of like, what the hell? Like, you know, that you've broken the contract. Like you've cheated, and not even
violated the rules of the world as you set them up.
Yeah. And so, I think
this makes me think, by the way, and I'm going to probably alienate everyone by bringing this up. Do you watch anime ever?
I've watched my Neon Genesis Evangelion, and does Avatar count?
Yeah, Avatar counts. It's an anime.
Yeah.
Okay, so Game of Thrones, there are two animes that I wanted to bring up very quickly. The first one is Hunter x Hunter, which I highly recommend you check out. The first couple seasons are on Netflix, and the reason you should watch it is beyond the fact that because you'll start to watch it, and you're going to be like, if you've seen shonen anime like Dragon Ball Z or Yu Yu Hakusho or stuff, you're going to be like, okay, this is well done, but I've seen this before.
Right.
But stick with it, because it's a deconstruction of the genre. So they set up the status quo so they can break it, and they break it in a really brilliant way. But Hunter x Hunter, by the time you get the fourth season of the show, is called the Chimera Ant arc. And it is what the final season of Game of Thrones should have been, like what the White Walkers should have been. They took, like, for, you know, this anime, they literally took all of the ingredients that needed to go into the end of Game of Thrones, but just did it in this screwball anime. And I won't spoil it for you, but like the final season right there, if you hate everything up until it, it's worth it just to watch that final season.
Mm-hmm.
That was the one thing that I wanted to bring up. But the second thing that I wanted to bring up was the fact that, we're talking a little bit about rules and about like what you can do and can't do as a writer. And I was a big believer in this until I saw JoJo's Bizarre Adventure.
Okay.
JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, especially the early seasons, is evidence that you can break literally every rule of writing imaginable and still somehow tell like a compelling and interesting story that like is difficult to look away from.
Interesting.
Yeah. JoJo's is the best way to describe JoJo's, especially the early seasons. You remember those games you had with a kid where you're like, oh, I've got, adamantium skins. I've got a magic bullets that destroys adamantium skin. Oh, yeah, well, I've got a shield that blocks the magic bullets. It's like that from a writing standpoint. Comes completely out of nowhere, no foreshadowing whatsoever. Brilliant.
It's one of those things. I mean, it's funny. Like in certain ways, I hate rules. I'm the type of person, and where like certain rules make sense to me, and so I'm like, oh, if it's like an ethical rule, like fine, like I respect that. If it's like something that's like going to help the little guy, I respect that. But there are so many rules that I just like instinctively, I'm like, oh, that's bureaucratic crap. No, I like that's kind of the reason I did this Kickstarter in the first place, was because I was just like, I'm tired of waiting for permission. Like, screw this. We're gonna do this on our own. And I mean, I had said with Spencer and Locke, when our pitch pages came in, I said, come hell or high water, I'm going to make this book, and I have to Kickstarter out of spite, I will. And that's exactly what I said to Ruben Rojas when we were doing the OZ. And, I think had COVID not struck, we probably would have wound up taking a traditional path, but because publishers were already dragging their heels before COVID, and then COVID hit, and then they were really dragging their heels, I was just like, well, I'm going on Kickstarter, and hopefully people will like it. We'll see what happens. This book is so good, I'm going to roll the dice on it. But at the same time, there's part of me that when it comes to narrative stuff, I'm like a huge stickler for it, and it's something that I want to get out of. It's something I want to teach myself to sort of be like, are there storytelling opportunities that can be made and consistent without, while breaking some rules? But at the same time, I consider myself very fortunate to have had the track record that I've had. But I know that batting average doesn't last forever, especially in industry. I want to be a 20-year man or a 30-year man. So I'm sort of still like, I have a bucket list of things that I want to do. And because I still consider myself fairly new at this, I still want to kind of hit the basics a little bit, where I'm like, okay, I did a crime story and a rom-com and a fantasy story, and we're getting art ready on my first sci-fi book. And, I've written some YA stuff that we're slowly getting the art together on. And, now I'm going to work in a horror thing. But I was like, oh, I really want to do a natural disaster book. I desperately want to do a natural disaster book. I got a time travel thing that I really want to do. It's, those are the sorts of things, or something with identical twins. Like I find like that's where I'm at right now. Ask me again in 5 years and I might consider that old hat because I've done it already. But for now, I'm like, oh, like anytime I see something cool, like Orphan Black, I'm like, oh, well, that's cool. I want to do Orphan Black. Philip Sevy has a book called Triage that is kind of like an awesome riff on that. Those are the sorts of things where I'm like, oh, okay, like I can, I see somebody's cool trick and I immediately am like, okay, how do I do my own spin on that? That's cool. But yeah,
it's a great attitude.
Yeah, like, but I do want to start breaking the rules more. I think that's something that would be, I have no problem breaking rules for any other facet of my life, but
so
for
might
some
as
reason,
well.
Yeah.
Well, it's really interesting. Yeah, definitely check out JoJo's, and do it if for no other reason. Do it to get to the third season where they introduce stands, because like one of the big problems in like anime in general is power creep. Like you've got like the Goku can only save the world from a Earth destroying villain so many times, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas what they did with stands is they basically gave people a ghost that hangs out behind them based upon like aspects of their personality and their characters, and they have the stands do the fighting as opposed to the people. And you know, you could have the most powerful stand in the world on certain things, but if you know he hits the rock to your scissors stand,
Right.
like you're going down. And so that keeps the combat really fresh. I'm also really interested in Hunter x Hunter. A great thing to look at is like the Nen system that's introduced in season 2, where you can really
Mm-hmm.
tell that the author Tagashi, like, he is clearly a fan of pen and paper RPGs.
Mm-hmm.
And he's based his magic system on like some homebrew D&D thing that he put his
Yeah.
own spin on, and it's really good and really fun. Plus, also, other point for Hunter x Hunter: second best clown-based villain in fiction.
Interesting. Okay, I'll have to try it. Well, that's okay. So are you saying that the best clown-based villain in fiction is the Joker or Pennywise?
The Joker.
Okay,
I
so he's
think,
better than Pennywise.
in my opinion, yes, though oddly similar to Pennywise in a
Oh,
weird
okay.
way, in
You
a
know,
weird, incredibly uncomfortable way that deals with childhood. That's all I'm
sure.
gonna say.
You know, it's interesting you talk about old school RPGs because that was something that also was a big influence on me for this book. I played Chrono Trigger a lot
Mm-hmm.
growing up, and boy, that was a huge influence on the way that Dorothy and this sort of makeshift army of four come together, because it's that same thread as the Judy Garland film, where you have all these very distinct archetypes together. The Tin Man, the Scarecrow, the Cowardly Lion. You know who they are immediately, and then you put them in a room together, and suddenly it's like strengthening iron. Like you see when these archetypes cause sparks, you start seeing new things about them. And Chrono Trigger is one of my favorite video games for that reason. And so I was like thinking like, okay, like what's the Chrono Trigger version of this?
Yeah.
And so if you like that, if you like Final Fantasy VII, you're gonna love what we do with these characters. Because we're able to take not just Dorothy as sort of this soldier who's able to weaponize the magic of Oz, but you see like the Tin Soldier, for example. He's been destroyed and rebuilt so many times with like any piece of metal around him, so he's turned into this towering like war machine freedom fighter. But
So cool.
at the same time, he's also the guy who wanted a heart. And so what
Mm-hmm.
happens to that guy when he's been watching his friends die in battle and he's been the one surviving all this time? Do you bury that heart, or does it always inevitably come back? The Scarecrow, meanwhile, like he's the guy who wanted a brain. And the problem is that he's realizing that you can be the smartest person in the room and you can't solve every problem.
Yeah.
And so suddenly, uh, it's that ego though that he
Yeah.
keeps going back to try to take control of the situation. And so his relationship, he's the most complicated character I think in the whole series. And I think readers' relationship with him will evolve a lot from our first issue to our last. But it's like being the smartest guy in the room. Sometimes that just means you're the first one to see how horrible it is and how horrifying it is and how unfixable it is. And yet this is the guy who's always going back to the Rubik's Cube,
Mm-hmm.
trying to solve
Trying
it.
to tinker around and solve the problem.
Trying to, yeah. And then
I have an
meanwhile,
idea of, by the way, where the lion is going, but I'm not going to say
so
it.
so the lion, is interesting. With very minimal spoilers, he doesn't show up a ton in our first issue. He'll be more in our second and third issues, but he's got a lot of parallels to Dorothy. His arc is one of legacy,
Mm-hmm.
and just like Dorothy, the lion, he wanted bravery, and it's
Mm-hmm.
one thing to be brave when you're just fighting for yourself, but what happens when you're the king of the animal kingdom?
And you're
Suddenly
fighting for everybody.
that calculus changes. And similar to Dorothy, it's sort of, how do you live up with this image of the past, this ideal of the past, when you've seen all this shit, and all the scars of war? How do you live up to that? Can you ever go back to that, or is that just like long gone in the past? So yeah, he's a really fun and interesting character that I had a lot of fun writing. But and then we've got little twists and turns. We do I try to veer on the side of accessibility. So I'm not doing like a ton of deep cuts for the Oz mythology. We're using that more for the settings to flesh it out. But like Jack Pumpkinhead is in the book. Yeah, he plays a bigger and bigger role in issues 2 and 3. I think our twist on the Wizard of Oz I'm particularly proud of, because the original movie. The Wizard of Oz is that he's the con man that you can't hate. Like he's just,
Yeah.
he is like, oh, he lies to everybody. And how can you be mad at that guy? How can you be mad at that face? He's sort of the ultimate in soft power and manipulation. And the way that
very American.
The way we've approached it in this book, I think pays tribute to that, but it has its own twist that I think is particularly satisfying. It's one of those things that I envisioned the wizard to have a pretty small role in this book originally, and then once I started writing, I said, well, throwing that out, I'm reworking his entire arc because he felt like the missing piece of the puzzle and the missing piece of this team. And it's one of those things that when you meet the wizard, it'll be sort of in the back half of our first issue. I think you'll fall in love with the character, and I think you'll be very excited to see his role in the greater storyline.
That's awesome, because to tell you the truth, I tend to instantly dislike and distrust politician type characters, sure. But at the same time, I'm very attracted to a good scoundrel trickster character, like a Mr. Wednesday.
Yeah, it's one of those things that Dorothy is sort of this unofficial leader of the resistance, and that's something she's going to really grapple with for most of this book, because she's not just dealing with trauma, but she's also dealing with the burden of leadership. And how do you make moral decisions in war when every choice you can make can wind up with someone dead?
Yeah.
And so having this character, sort of riding shotgun, it gives us a little room for exposition, but it's sort of that intellectual authority figure. So like if the Tin Man is kind of the bronze and Dorothy is the skills, just having somebody who like has the institutional knowledge is it's sort of a nice touchstone to that history of Oz. And just seeing also how this character, who is not really much of a fighter, gets dragged into all these like combat situations. Like Ruben is starting to get to those areas now, but I'm just like I'm already like preemptively cracking up thinking about it.
That's always the best when you're sitting there thinking about what your characters are doing, you start giggling.
Yeah. So I think that could be really interesting.
Cool. So we are. I've taken up a lot of your time. So
sure.
What I'll do. One, I'd love to have you back on the program sometime if
Absolutely.
you'd be open to it.
Absolutely.
That's great. Yeah, this was really awesome. So where can people find you? Where can people find the Kickstarter? I will be putting the link in the description, but plug your pluggables.
Sure.
Real quick.
So you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Pepose D. You can also follow on Facebook, David Pepose Comics. We love it when people subscribe to my newsletter, Pep Talks, which is at bit.ly/pepnews. And then you can follow the OZ on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at the OZ Comic. And if you go to bit.ly/the OZ, that'll take you straight to our Kickstarter page. Because we're about, as of this recording, we're about $500 away from our first stretch goal, and then we've got some more stretch goals coming. And we're really excited. So tell your friends, because we want to unlock that digital comics extravaganza. Absolutely.
Now, I did want to mention also, because you mentioned stretch goals, and I haven't looked at the page since I pledged.
Sure.
And I'm really excited because I'm going to get one of your one of the three variant covers, which is really exciting. So like on your actual Kickstarter for one of the, are you considering doing like any additional comics or like any bonus mini comics or anything?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that the calculus that I'm always running is just what can I offer that will not delay the shipping and will not delay fulfillment? It's one of those things. Ruben and Whitney are working on the second installment now, but I know in my heart of hearts there's no way that they would be able to get it done before our December fulfillment would be due. Yeah, it was one of those things for me for Kickstarter. I was just like, okay, what can we offer that will still give Ruben and Whitney time to do the work without killing themselves and without like doing it at a low quality. But that's it. There's a lot of stuff that we're offering. The digital comics extravaganza. We've got by the time this goes up, I'm sure we'll have hit our stretch goal already. So we've got some cool prints that are on their way. We've got some other more collectible stuff that we can start adding to the mix as things start to roll. By the time this goes live, we'll probably have hit our stretch goal, so I can talk about this, is we're going to have a social stretch goal as well. I'll be adding this in our updates, but I'll have a tweet where if we can share the OZ's page, if we can get enough likes and retweets, we actually have an OZ theme song that has been recorded. It is beautiful. And once we hit our social stretch goal, every single backer will get it.
That's cool.
That'll be something that we will add in for every single backer. We've got tons of stuff coming. That's been sort of the fun of all of this, has been saying, okay, like, what else can we add that won't break the shipping bank? And
the shipping and the time frame is like that's what I'm learning, because I did my first Kickstarter and we're on fulfillment now. It's totally messing with everything. So I'll just say before we peace out, link is in the description. Go to his Kickstarter. Swaza fans, people who've been following me on Facebook and YouTube, head on out there. If you are just encountering me for the first time right now, by the way, check out Snow White Zombie. We will be doing a Kickstarter for Snow White Zombie #3 very soon, just once I get the stuff out for #2. And please subscribe, because I'm trying to hit 1,000 subscribers by the end of August. We have like 80 left to go, and when we hit it, I have to read a poem for the whole for all of my followers. So smash that subscribe button, hit that like button, and I'm going to give the last word to you, Dave.
Yeah, no, the thing is with Kickstarter, every backer matters, every dollar counts, and for me, I'm not doing this for the money. I'm doing this for the readership. And so, we've got rewards that fit every level of your budget. Like I said, we're doing, double-sized issues, so you get a lot of bang for your buck. And we're also, we're adding rewards, both digital and physical, to make sure that this feels worth your while. And I guess the other thing I'll say is that this story, if it may seem shocking to you at face value, that's not what I do. I don't do stories for shock value for the sake of shock value. It's the laziest way to write. I feel like there's no emotional investment to that. There's no engagement. That you can get your foot in the door once with shock, but if you don't care, they're not coming back for seconds. That's the sort of way that somebody looks at a car crash. They're not coming back for seconds. And that's the thing. I don't believe in punching down. I try to treat my characters with empathy and compassion, because I know that's treating our readers with empathy and compassion. And so, I feel like we've worked hard to justify our story narratively and to give you characters that even if they start in dark places, that makes them fight all the harder for their redemption. So, join us, be a Yellow Brick Road warrior, and back the OZ today.
Absolutely. Back the OZ today. And I can say from my personal experience, your work is brilliant. It's really good. And I'm very honored to have you on the podcast. All right.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. This is Brenton with Insurrection with Brenton Lengel signing off. Go and pledge to the OZ, like and subscribe.